Today, we're turning the spotlight on comments made by Piers on his show and social platforms, remarks directed at Prince Harry that cross a boundary we should all recognise: the boundary between spirited commentary and rhetorical violence. We will unpack exactly what he said, why it matters, and what it tells us about public discourse when a broadcaster of Morgan's prominence chooses to use such language. Let's dive in. To set the scene, Morgan has long been a vocal critic of Harry. His media ventures, his public disclosures about the royal family, and his personal narrative. That's within the realm of legitimate commentary. But the problem arises when Morgan shifts from critique into metaphor-laden threats of bodily harm. One of his most striking statements: "If one of my siblings had spent the past few years trashing the rest of the family on global media platforms, I would dismember them one limb at a time, and after I'd severed all their limbs, I would probably incinerate them. I'm the devil. That's what devils do." While Morgan later said he meant it metaphorically, the imagery, the severing, the incineration, the limb-by-limb dismemberment, remains troubling. What exactly did he say? It's worth quoting the gist, in his own aggressive tone, to the extent public transcripts record it. Morgan positioned Harry as the sibling who trashed his family. "I mean that if you'd behaved the way this man has behaved, in any family, people wouldn't stand for it." Then he added the limb-by-limb dismemberment line. "I'd dismember you limb by limb until you're nothing, and then incinerate the remains." This was broadcast on a widely viewed programme and on social media excerpts, meaning the imagery wasn't confined to a private conversation. It entered the public domain. Let's pause. Why should we care about metaphors? After all, commentators routinely use hyperbole. Yet there are a few reasons why this crosses more than a stylistic boundary. First, violent metaphor in a public broadcast carries real weight. When a broadcaster says, "I'll dismember you," even if metaphorical, the choice of bodily violence imagery is significant. It's not, "I'll annihilate your argument." It's "sever your limbs and incinerate your body." That invokes physical harm, terror, destruction. It might be rhetorically intended to show moral outrage, but it misframes the dispute in terms of vengeance and bodily destruction, rather than dialogue or reasoned disagreement. Second, Morgan isn't speaking in isolation. He holds a prominent platform, significant reach. This means the language matters beyond the immediate moment. When a commentator uses graphic violence as metaphor, especially against a public figure, we risk normalizing aggressive, dehumanizing rhetoric. It shifts public discourse terrain from "why did you do that?" into "I will smash you." It encourages a culture where severe personal attacks, even bodily harm metaphors, become part of mainstream talk show script. Third, the target here, Prince Harry, is not a politician delivering policy statements. He is a public figure, yes, but the discourse here is about family, personal disclosures, media fights. So the analogy of dismemberment pushes the conflict from public policy or institutional critique into intimate relational violence. Morgan himself framed the analogy in familial terms. "If one of my siblings..." So this becomes a metaphor for sibling revenge, which for many evokes personal trauma, family breakdown, even threat. Why does Morgan do it? He frames himself as the offended party, the one whose family, in his analogy, has been trashed by Harry, so the speaker feels entitled to extreme retribution. He paints Harry as hypocrite, traitor, exploiter of the royal name and institution. And then he imagines a vigilante response. It is self-righteous, weaponized, theatrical. Instead of engaging with specifics of Harry's claims or disclosures, the remark reduces Harry to an object of rage, an enemy to be destroyed. Let's reflect on the broader implications. Public commentary should hold power and figures to account. That's vital. But when the language becomes violent metaphor of bodily harm, severance, incineration, the moral grammar of debate shifts. We move from "you did something I disagree with" to "you deserve to be bodily destroyed." That not only undermines civil discourse, it invites a zero-sum mentality. There's no transformation, no conversation, only destruction. It also matters because the metaphor originates in real-world violence. Dismemberment is one of the most graphic forms of bodily harm. Incineration recalls extreme obliteration. To deploy these images casually on a talk show is to normalize the spectacle of destruction. And in a media age where rhetoric can spill into real-world threats, we ought to ask whether we are blurring the line between metaphor and menace. From another angle, consider the personal dimension. Morgan chooses family metaphor: sibling, betrayal, revenge. That resonates beyond the story of Harry and the royals. It taps into primal fears of being cast out, betrayed by your kin, punished by your kin. That emotional potency amplifies the violence of the metaphor. When we hear about limb by limb, we instinctively feel the personal terror of such an image. So the rhetoric isn't only about a public feud, it becomes personal, visceral, almost physical. That intensity can trigger, alienate, polarize. Let us also ask, is Morgan's use of such imagery consistent with his stated mission? Morgan's platform frequently champions free speech, critique of institutions, media accountability. A broadcaster in this space arguably ought to elevate discourse, not degrade it. By choosing violent metaphor, he undermines his own credibility. He becomes the instigator rather than the commentator, the avenger rather than the interlocutor. That creates cognitive dissonance for the viewer. Are we here for reasoned debate or for gladiatorial spectacle? Now, there are arguments in Morgan's defense. One might say he was using hyperbole, he didn't intend literal violence, it was metaphorical. One might also say Harry's public actions, his disclosures, his criticisms of his family and monarchy, his commercial media work, are fair game for harsh commentary. Indeed they are. We must allow robust debate. But robustness is not the same as bloodlust. Critique can and should be vigorous, but it need not resort to the language of bodily mutilation. There is a distinction between saying he's betrayed trust, exploited privilege, misrepresented himself, and saying I'd cut you limb by limb and burn you afterwards. The latter invites spectacle rather than substance. It's also worth pointing out the hypocrisy that emerges when such language is used by someone who often claims a higher moral ground. Morgan criticizes Harry for perceived hypocrisy, for trashing his family in public while enjoying the spoils of his royal status. Yet Morgan himself uses a metaphor of family betrayal and destruction, even though he is not personally involved in the family relationship at the heart of the dispute. The analogy places Morgan as avenging brother, when familiarizing himself with a family he is not part of. That raises questions about rhetorical opportunism. Let's also consider potential consequences. First, public tolerance of violent metaphors can degrade the quality of public debate. When commentators escalate to bodily harm imagery, the threshold for what counts as acceptable discourse shifts. Others feel they must respond in kind, escalate further, or retreat. Second, it may contribute to further polarization. Those aligned with Harry may feel attacked by extreme language. Those aligned with Morgan may feel justified in dehumanizing their target. Third, it may desensitize audiences to violent language in public media, a slippery slope. From a broader ethical viewpoint, if we are all watchers of public discourse, we have a responsibility. Not only producers of content, but receivers. When we allow violent metaphors to pass unchallenged, we implicitly consent to their normalization. We might think, oh, that's just talk show hyperbole. But the accumulation of these rhetorical blows shapes the tone of public life. In concluding this critique, I'll say, Morgan's remarks about Prince Harry are not about fair disagreement or reasoned analysis. They are about spectacle, vengeance, and metaphorical violence. He frames Harry as enemy, non-person, destroyable being. And in doing so, he transforms a family media dispute into a gladiatorial narrative of bodily annihilation. That's not commentary. That's a threat masquerading as metaphor. And in the age of media amplification, such tropes matter. If we care about public discourse, about the dignity of debate, and about the boundaries of critique, then we must push back when violence becomes metaphor in mainstream commentary. Commentators are free to criticize, to lampoon, to expose hypocrisy. They are not free, I'd argue, to weaponize language of bodily harm as casual metaphor when real people and real families are part of the story. Thank you for watching. If you found this useful, please like, subscribe, ring the bell. I'll be back for more analysis soon. Until then, remember, arguments can be fierce, but they need not become threats. Let's keep discourse sharp and humane.